Welcome back. Today we're exploring the top 5 deadly traps in the Queen's Gambit that can catch your opponent off guard right from the opening. These traps can win material or even deliver a quick checkmate. Let's dive in, begin with pawn to d4, followed by pawn to d5, and then pawn to c4. This setup is known as the Queen's Gambit. Now let's see what happens if black decides to capture the pawn. By playing pawn to e3, we prepare to regain the pawn using our light-squared bishop. The best practical decision for black is to ignore the extra pawn and focus on developing pieces. However, if black tries to hold the material advantage, pawn to b5 is a possible attempt. In response, we immediately challenge the support with pawn to a4. At this point, black has a few defensive options. Playing pawn to a6 does not work, because after the exchanges, you can simply capture the rook. Now what if black tries bishop to d7 instead? After the trades, you can develop the knight to c3, attacking the bishop. If the bishop retreats, it may appear that black is safe, since the bishop protects the pawn while the knight supports the bishop. But white has a powerful tactical idea here. Can you find the winning move? Yes, the key move is queen to f3. Now the knight cannot move, because doing so would leave the bishop undefended. This means pawn to c6 is black's only reasonable defense. However, the knight is now overloaded with defensive responsibilities. So we unleash the decisive tactic, rook captures bishop. After the knight recaptures, we give check with the queen. Surprisingly, black has only one legal move, queen to d7. Then we capture the rook. Again, blocking with the queen is the only defense. Now we step back with the queen, and at the same time, we capture the knight. In just 3 moves, white completely destroys black's queenside, leaving a clearly winning position. Now let's go back for a moment. If black instead defends with pawn to c6 in this position, the same tactical idea appears. After the exchanges, queen to f3 again attacks the rook, forcing black to lose either the knight or the bishop. Now let's look at another line in the Queen's Gambit accepted. If black plays more accurately and focuses on development, the game might continue with knight to f6. After bishop captures, many black players prefer to fianchetto their dark-squared bishop before castling kingside. So after pawn to g6, we develop with knight to f3. When black places the bishop on g7, we play a brilliant move, queen to a4, delivering check. At this point, black has several ways to block the check, but almost all of them lead to serious problems, except one. Let's begin with the most common response. Many players might choose bishop to d7, a natural-looking move that also attacks the queen. However, we calmly move queen to b3, creating a double attack on 2 important targets. Even if black castles, we can increase the kingside pressure with knight to e5, so clearly bishop to d7 is not a good defensive option. Now, what if black plays knight to c6 instead? Once again, knight to a5 becomes very powerful, attacking both the knight and the f7 pawn. If black castles, we can simply exchange knights and win a free pawn. And if black tries to defend with the bishop, we have a devastating tactic, a knight fork on the queen and rook, winning material. Alright, let's rewind. What other options does black have? What if black plays knight to d7? Now we have a brilliant sacrifice with bishop. After the king captures, we follow up with knight to g5, delivering check. If the king moves to e8, it becomes completely trapped. If the king goes to f8, we deliver a beautiful knight fork and win the queen. And if the king runs to g8, we have a forced checkmate in 4 moves. Can you find it? First, queen to c4, giving check. The only safe square for the king is f8. Now the threat is queen to f7, which is checkmate. Black tries to block, but we simply capture. Black blocks again, but this time we finish the game with a crushing checkmate. Now let's consider another possibility. What if black blocks the check with a knight instead? In that case, we again have the same brilliant bishop sacrifice followed by knight to g5, delivering check. If the king retreats, we get the same winning ideas we saw earlier. Even though black could try king to f6, the position is already terrible. The king is completely exposed, and we only need to chase it down to finish the attack. Engines like Stockfish evaluate this position as roughly a 6-point advantage for white. Alright, let's rewind once more. What other way can black block the check? What about queen to d7? Once again, we respond with a checking move from the bishop. If the king captures the bishop, we immediately strike with knight check, forking the king and queen and winning decisive material. So instead, the king will be forced to move to d8 or f8, losing the right to castle. At that point, we can calmly continue development with bishop to b3 or even queen to b3, and white gains full control of the position. Now, the only move that might look reasonable for black is pawn to c6. There are no immediate tactical traps here, but white still stands very comfortably. And that's the beauty of this idea. Even if black defends accurately, white still ends up with a strong position. If black doesn't play precisely, white quickly gains a big advantage. Now let's move on to our next trap in the Slav defense. After a few natural developing moves, the pawns get exchanged, leaving black with an isolated pawn. This is the perfect moment to play queen to b3, attacking both weak pawns. The most common replies, queen to b6 and pawn to b6, are actually mistakes. Can you find the best move for black in this position? Surprisingly, the best move is to retreat the bishop, even though it looks a bit awkward. Now let's examine the common responses. If black plays queen to b6, don't trade queens immediately. First capture the pawn. If black captures the knight, recapture with the queen. And if black takes the queen, don't rush to recapture. First play knight to f6, giving check, and only then recapture. Now let's look at the second common response, pawn to b6. Can you find white's crushing move here? The key move is pawn to e4. This activates the diagonal of the bishop, preparing an attack from both sides. If black captures the pawn, we play knight to e5, threatening checkmate. The only defenses are pawn to e6 or bishop to e6, but in either case, bishop to b5 follows with check. Black must block with a knight, after which bishop to g5 pins the knights, leaving them unable to defend each other. Eventually, both knights fall, and white continues the attack. Even if black captures with the knight or bishop, the final result is the same. After the exchanges, white obtains a decisive attacking position. In the Slav defense, if black develops this bishop, which happens very often, white can dominate the game right from the opening. Now let's look at another trap in the Queen's Gambit declined. After pawn to d4, pawn to d5, and pawn to c4, black responds with the common move pawn to e6. The game continues with natural development. Knight to c3, knight to f6, bishop to g5, bishop to e7, pawn to e3, and black castles. We develop the other knight to f3 and black knight to d7, and then the central pawns are exchanged. After black recaptures, we activate our bishop. Black places the rook on the semi-open file, and we mirror the move with our rook. Black then plays pawn to c6, strengthening the center and preventing knight to b5. This is a very typical setup in the Queen's Gambit, and now it's time to prepare the trap. We first castle. After black plays pawn to h6, attacking the bishop and creating space for the king, we simply retreat the bishop. Many players now try to exchange the bishop pair by playing knight to h5, attempting to trade it for the bishop, but this is a mistake. Can you find the best move for white? The brilliant move is knight takes on d5. Black cannot capture the knight, because bishop to c7 would trap the queen, so black cannot take the knight, and even if black captures the bishop, white recaptures with the knight, gaining a strong central pawn advantage. Now let's move on to our next trap, the Albin counter gambit. Here is how the main line develops. After pawn takes on e5, black pushes pawn to d4. Then knight to f3 attacks the pawn, and knight to c6 comes in to defend it. Next, pawn to g3 prepares to fianchetto the bishop, followed by bishop to g4, attacking the knight and indirectly targeting the pawn. After bishop to g2, black plays queen to d7, aiming to exchange bishops. At this moment, castling may look like the most natural move, but to surprise your opponent, play pawn to h3 instead. This move often confuses black, and many players decide to capture the knight. This allows white to take the free pawn on b7. A very common response from black is to castle queenside with the king, defending the pawn and preparing to activate the rook along the semi-open file. But at this moment, black has actually walked straight into your trap. Can you find the winning move? The decisive move is bishop to g4, pinning the queen. But what if black tries to block with pawn to f5? Should you capture with the bishop? That would not work, because black could simply recapture with the queen. So what is the correct continuation? You capture the pawn en passant with your pawn, which reactivates the pin. Now the queen has no way to escape. Thanks for watching.